Hi everyone. Today, let's start off with talking about the economic calendar. Then we'll talk about Max Payne for Friday. Then we got lots of charts to go over. Then we'll look at my positions going into Monday and my thoughts going into the rest of the week. If you like trading stocks and options and making money, definitely like and subscribe. I make videos like this every single day that the markets are open, as well as Sundays, so make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Welcome to the Portfolio Bulletin. Let's get started. Starting off with the economic calendar, I'm going to go over this fairly quickly because we have talked about it a few times now, but we do have Fed Powell talking to the Senate on Tuesday, and then he's talking to the House here on Wednesday. Those are obviously very important. We have the JOLTS report here on Wednesday as well. Then we have jobless claims here on Thursday, Fed governor speaking here, and then we have non-farm payrolls here on Friday. It's going to be a big one, and then we have the unemployment rate to go along with it. Very, very big reports on Friday. And then federal budget, always interesting to see how much money they're spending because that does play a role when it comes to inflation. All the money that they borrow is new money going into the system, so that is something to watch. But otherwise, like I said, non-farm payrolls, unemployment rate, and Fed Powell talking all this week. Big week in terms of market catalysts. Moving over to Max Payne. For the options open interest, you can see Max Payne is still sitting at 400. Markets are sitting quite a bit above that. You have a large put wall at 395 and a large call wall here at 410. Put call ratio still sitting very high at 2.1. Options open interest sitting at 1.15 million. Not a ton of options, but it's a decent amount. Looking at options in the market, big put wall here at 400, decent amount here at 405. You can see how much money there is here to the put side and how fast it goes up. Just keep that in mind if you're trading bearishly this week. Of course, we are a little bit overextended, but you do have to have your limits. 395 is probably going to be a low for the week. I don't expect to close below that level. And like I said, 410 is probably going to be your upper limit for the week, in my opinion. Moving over to the SPX here on the weekly view, you can see it was a very strong week. Looks very good on the reversal. You can see on the volume profile, we touched that level, 39.50 being a strong level of support over the last few weeks. And that level continues to be a strong level of support. We are above all of the moving averages here on the weekly view, so that indicates some bullishness. And you can see the VWAP is currently trading at 39.85, so right at the base of this previous candle. Looks fairly strong going into the next week. My only concern here right now is that this does look like a bit of a wedge. This most recent high was not fully up to that previous trend line that we've been talking about in the other videos. It is worth noting that we did get a nice little volume spike on this last week, indicating that this could be moving higher here over the next week or two potentially. Doesn't mean we can't get a pullback within that, but it does look fairly bullish. You can see the volume spikes on bullish moves have been pretty consistent. Bearish price action, decreasing volume. Similarly here, big volume spike, decreasing volume as we fell. And then once we started moving higher here, that looked pretty good. We do have a volume node here at 41.35 going back to May of 22. If we get into that area, I expect to find resistance. Certainly could be an area where you would want to double top if you are looking bearish. But my guess is that we'll probably swing that high just slightly up to this next trend line at probably 42.55 or so. If we zoom out a little bit just to get a little bit more volume on that profile, you can see that same level important here at 41.30. Lower volume through this zone, and then you could even see a spike all the way up to 44.50. That would be another pretty decent volume level going back to this previous price action. If we got that high, that would be pretty amazing over the next couple of weeks. But like I said, I do expect to find resistance at this previous high and the trend line here that we have, as this does look like a bit of a wedge in the short term. Until we break out from here, then we'll have to reassess the shape. Moving over to the daily chart, you can see the 21 EMA as well as the VWAP here on the daily chart is sitting at right around 40.70. So that will be an area of resistance. Could certainly push into that zone tomorrow. Touch there, get a little bit of a retrace, find some support, maybe even as low as 40.20 back at this recent trend line. Get a little bit of a pullback and then a continuation. That would be interesting. But I do expect a little bit of resistance here at the daily RVOL and that 21 EMA. Otherwise, looking at the MACD, very bullish. RSI, very bullish. Don't see the same kind of volume profile here on the daily chart, which is interesting. I would like to see this start to tick up a little bit in terms of volume. That would make me feel a little bit better about the move. But right now, you do have to expect at least a little bit more bullish price action in the short term. Moving over to the NASDAQ here on the weekly, you can see we've got the same type of bar here. It looks very strong. Looking to test that 55-week moving average, currently sitting at 12,344. So we have about 50 points of upside before we hit that level. I would expect to find some resistance there. Again, correlating with maybe a shorter term pullback. Maybe we retest that 9-week moving average. That would be interesting. Probably see a tick up on that going into next week. So that'll probably swing up to around 12,100. Get a little pullback, retest that, and then see a push through that 55. Certainly possible. And then I wouldn't expect to get any higher than this trend line, at least over the next few weeks. It's currently sitting at about 13,050, 13,060, somewhere in that zone. It is worth noting, though, that the MACD is still stepping down. We did not get a step up with this most recent rally. But like I said, that would be the upper limit that I would expect this rally to go before we saw a more substantial pullback. Moving over to the NASDAQ on the daily chart. This is actually the QQQ, so we can look at volume a little bit here. You can see MACD showing some strength, RSI showing strength. Did get a nice step up on volume over the last 2 days, which is good to see. Something that I didn't notice previously is that this doji that we had here on Friday the 24th did have a pretty high volume candle as well, and it was sitting at support. And then the next day we gapped up, so that was interesting. Definitely showing some bullishness there. You do get the nice pullback, but then we overthrew the lows, which generally, if you see a fake out breakout on high volume the way that this is, usually that move is going to have some strength to it, and that is what we've seen here. So that's definitely something that is important going into this next week. Does look pretty strong. In terms of volume profile, it's pretty much as you would expect. Decent amounts of volume throughout this lower consolidation levels. Highest volume level sitting at 293.72, so right in that zone where we found support. And you wouldn't expect to find really serious resistance until we get up to this 304, 305 zone. This area has pretty maybe a little bit right where we are, right at this trend line, which is interesting at 360. It also does correlate with the 21 EMA and VWAP there, so definitely interesting. Could see a small rejection there. But like I said, the volume here is pretty low, and you would generally expect to get back into this 304, 305 zone before we find any kind of major resistance. That would also correlate with these trend lines up here, which are interesting, going back to these previous highs, trending up into that zone. Usually when you have trend lines this close together, you expect to overshoot them and push up to probably 310 if we do get up to this 306.75 zone. Of course, I don't think it's all going to happen in one push or one day or anything like that. There will probably be some choppiness in here, similar to what we had in this recent rally. But in terms of price targets, that's what I'm looking at right now here on the NASDAQ. Moving over to the Russell here on the weekly chart, everything looks pretty bullish, similar to the other major indices. Looking at that next trend line as resistance, probably at 242 or so, 240. That upper trend line being resistance just above that most recent high here. RSI looks strong, MACD looks strong, continuing to hold above that 9 EMA. Probably going to find some resistance here at the 144 EMA, currently trading at 1957. Definitely a zone where you could find resistance. It's been dynamic supply and demand a few times here. You can see going back to September of 22, acted as resistance after the gap through. Also was resistance here in November of 22. You could say this was an overthrow and rejection here in January, and now we're going to come up, retest that level one more time here, and we'll see if we can hold above it this time. And if we can, then you're looking to that 2040 level that we talked about. Moving over to the daily chart, you can see similar thesis interacting with that 21 EMA as well as VWAP here. Volume profile says 186.90, 187 is going to be strong support if we do come back on and retest that level. Lots and lots of volume done in that zone. Even if we zoom out here, including this lower volume, you can see this is still the highest volume area. And you would expect this to at least get up to that 195 zone. Probably going to need to extend some of these trend lines. I'm sure we're going to interact with them once again here. If we get up into this 198, 199 zone, that would be interesting. MACD, very bullish. RSI, very bullish. Volume stepping up here on the last day of the week, which is definitely what you want to see. And so just like the others, everything looks a little bit bullish, but maybe a little bit overextended and in a zone where we could find some resistance in the short term. Moving over to the Dow here on the weekly view, this is pretty interesting. So the Dow is showing some different indicators. MACD showing bearish, RSI showing bearish. At trend resistance, this is a very long-term trend line. We had a powerful move through that level 2 weeks ago. And then last week, we're coming up and retesting that trend line. Definitely something to pay attention to as we go into the next week. This could certainly be a point where the Dow starts to roll over and gives us a little bit of an indicator that maybe this bullish move on the other indices is a little bit of a fake out. This is something that I'm watching here, and it does look pretty important here on the Dow. Moving over to the Dow on the daily, a little bit different story here. So MACD still showing bullish, RSI showing bullish. Worth noting that volume has been flat here over the last 2 days despite the upward price action. So volume not really participating. We are just out of that first volume zone and we're moving back into the previous one. You would expect resistance at 338.50, 339 back in this previous high volume zone. Makes sense considering how much price action was done here. But if we do break through this low, then we're looking at a big move down to probably 307. Certainly some support lines that might have reactions, but the volume here is just not there. Even if we zoom out, there's definitely some volume here at 318, but that's a long way down from where we are right now. If we get a rejection and we can get through this previous volume zone, that's going to be a pretty big swing down on the Dow. So keep that in mind. The Dow not showing nearly as bullish as the other major indices. And also similarly here, we have the 21 EMA and VWAP sitting up here right around 335.70 or so. So just a couple of points up from here, big resistance. And then we have that huge volume node on the Dow sitting up there. So keep an eye on this. Certainly seems like we could go a little bit higher, but looks like stronger resistance on the Dow. Moving over to the SPY divided by the M2 money supply, giving you a better perspective on the market value as a ratio of M2. And here you can see the 144 EMA as well as the 200 SMA sitting up here just a little bit higher, basically at that previous high. And this has been an important level here recently. And then you have a pretty major trend line sitting just above that as well. You can see all of the previous interactions here going back all the way to 2018. It does go back further, but we've talked about that in other videos. And you can see this is going to be a zone of resistance for sure. It certainly could overthrow it again, retest that trend line. So still showing a little bit of bullish price action, but definitely some resistance in here. You can certainly look at this as a little bit of a head and shoulders here with a left shoulder, head, right shoulder now. We still haven't really been able to break out of this neckline because of this high peak that we had in August. Kind of a weird neckline, kind of hard to trade, but certainly interesting. Looks like a solid bottom, but strong resistance like we talked about right up in this zone. Looking at the MACD as well, you can see it still stepped down last week despite that bullish move. So don't get too excited on this move until we see a little bit more follow through, in my opinion. Moving over to the NASDAQ divided by the SPY, this is certainly very interesting here. You can see we are right at the top of that range here. We've been trading in this zone, kind of in a bull flag looking setup here. But we are at resistance. If this does break out, that could obviously be very bullish. We've been much higher than this before, so it could absolutely go higher. But we've been in a very strong downtrend for many months. So this is something that I'm watching here, looking for that breakout potentially in the next day. But it's certainly possible that the NASDAQ could pull back versus the SPY over the next couple days, even if the markets are going up. SPY, critical level right at the SMA, certainly a zone where you could bounce off, just like we did here on 15 February. Similarly here, you can see two really strong bull days on this ratio, just like we had. And now we're at resistance again, certainly looking like you could pull back from here. So keep an eye on this one going into Monday. If we do see a little bit of a pullback, that could be an indicator that this resistance is going to hold and that RSI is going to turn down, giving us at least a little bit of a pullback early in the week. Moving over to SPY versus gold. I'm not sure where they get these volume profiles here on this indicator, but it's worth noting that the weekly close was a hanging man, looks pretty weak. Seems like we're probably going to fill that in and go a little bit lower, meaning that the SPX is probably going to pull back versus gold. Gold might be rallying here a little bit. MACD looks like it's ready to roll over, is basically flat the last 2 days. Looks like it's stepping down here the next week, in my opinion. Probably at least going to get a retest of the 200 SMA sitting down here at 2287, back in this previous zone of a little bit higher volume from where we were. This zone was just a little bit too strong. Came in here, got rejection, made sense, and I would guess that's going to have a little bit of follow through here, in my opinion. Moving over to stocks above their 20-day and 200-day moving averages. This is not something that I've talked about recently. I used to talk about it all the time. I definitely need to put it back in the rotation here, but you can see we've fallen off a cliff here on the 200-day moving average, found support back at this 16 zone. Makes sense that we would have found support there. There's a pretty solid level that we'd been watching here previously. Overthrew it by a bit here, but then found the bounce. Certainly looking at that 21 EMA here as an area of resistance, and then you have this kind of trend line that we'd formed going back to that 5175 level. MACD showing strength, RSI showing strength. But going over here to the 200-day moving average, not quite the same story. Bounced off the 21 EMA here on the weekly, but the weekly chart, MACD, and RSI are still showing bearishness despite the last rally that we had. Jumping this down to the daily chart, it is showing bullish just like the other charts. Weekly chart still showing bearish, daily chart showing bullish. We have to see that follow through if we are going to get new highs. Otherwise, this looks pretty weak. You can see that island reversal that we've had on this indicator, still creating slightly higher lows compared to this most recent low. Overall, you do have to watch that weekly and daily and see which one ends up winning. Usually the longer term one wins in my opinion. Moving over to transports here on the daily and weekly. This is interesting, not showing the same weakness as the other ones. Weekly chart getting a step up here on MACD, finding support at this previous high volume zone. And that's the same zone you can see here on the daily chart, that 225 level being strong support. Didn't come down and retest the 144 or 200 SMA here like the major indices. So transport's looking a little stronger, definitely showing some bullish price action here. And you can also see we retested that same trend line, actually overthrew it quite a lot here. Not the same wedge that we saw on the S&Ps. So transports showing strength and supporting the rally and some potential follow through here. We do get a retest of that upper trend line. It's going to be around 246, 247, 248 back at this previous zone. That might be a really strong rally, maybe 250 a little bit later. Certainly interesting. But right now, transport's showing us that we are going higher over the next few weeks. Moving over to staples versus discretionary here on the weekly chart, you can see staples giving you that hanging man. Did come off some pretty strong support, this longer term trend line that we'd been watching. We also have the weekly 144 EMA down there. Certainly a zone where we could continue to find support potentially, but this doesn't look good at the end of the week. You have lots of EMAs and RVOL and VWAP sitting up here potentially looking to roll over. And in the exact opposite situation here, you do have consumer discretionary showing you a very bullish candle coming off of support here. VWAP sitting down here. Large volume node sitting below you. Looks strong. Volume picking up on the last candle here. Looks strong overall. And you would expect maybe a pushback up into this 155 zone. Zoom out to look at a little bit more volume. Actually, not a ton of volume here until you get up to this previous high around 146. So discretionary might be a little bit stronger. Would like to see this volume pick up a little bit. You can see how much volume was happening here on this recent fall from December of 21 all the way to the low here in June of 22. Huge amounts of volume happening during that period. And volume has been pretty low here. It is ticking up slightly, but not much. I'd like to see that volume come through and see a nice little push here and give us a little bit more follow through on discretionary if we are going to get that kind of a move. Moving over to the dollar here, you can see similarly, we do have a split thesis, right? So we have the dollar rolling over, MACD rolling over on the daily, RSI showing weakness. But the weekly chart is showing bullishness, kind of flat, kind of close to that zero level. So you could see this tick down once we hit that zero level here. Definitely interesting. But we are above the SMA here on the RSI. Certainly could come down, retest that SMA, and then get a continuation here. Maybe we get a little bit deeper pullback to the 9-week moving average. Currently sitting at 103.36. That would be interesting. That would also correlate with a pretty strong support level that we had been watching here. And that's probably the thesis that we should go with. Bit of a pullback, a little deeper than previously expected. Find a higher low here, set up that bigger trend line, set up that trend where you have a pretty solid high and a set in low here. And then we can start to channel higher over the longer term. That's what makes sense to me. But really, I don't want to see a step down on this weekly chart. If we are going to continue bullish, that would be a little bit of a trap. But when those traps are set and you do catch them and you can get on the right side of that trade, it does tend to make sense. So if we see equities moving higher, dollar moving lower, finding support about 1 point lower than we are right now, then we start to find some support. Equities see a little bit of a pullback, and we see the dollar start to reach up here and maybe retest the 200-day moving average, currently at 106.54. So that would be interesting. That's probably what I'm looking for. Looks weak in the short term, but probably still bullish over the medium to longer term. Moving over here to JNK, this is one that I like to watch a lot. Right now, it's kind of mixed, right? So we have this bottoming formation, does kind of look like a W with lots of gaps in it. Definitely interesting on the daily chart. Not a ton of volume down here. Volume's not really ticking up that strongly. RSI did bounce pretty heavily off the SMA, looks strong on the daily chart. Momentum moving into bullish territory. Weekly momentum kind of flat. Could certainly go flat and then bounce back into bullish territory. That would be interesting. You absolutely have to respect that candle close for the weekly. Looks very bullish. Definitely in a zone of support. You would want to see this push back up, retest the 55-week moving average. That would be around 94.30. That would be interesting. Couple of things in here like the 9 EMA and VWAP in here, but certainly could push back up to this previous high, retest that 55 EMA. Zooming out a little bit, you can see huge amount of volume was done in this previous high up around 108 to 110. Not a ton of volume through here, and then we've seen another big blip of volume in this previous zone, certainly indicating that JNK could be going higher here, maybe into a longer term bull trend. But like I said, I would like to see volume come in a little bit stronger. We had some decent volume at the end of most recent dip. You can see that volume coming in here. But on this rally, we just haven't seen it come in quite yet. Very small steps up over the last 2 days. Lots of resistance in this area on the daily chart. Got the 144 EMA, VWAP, 21 EMA, 55, and 200 SMAs all sitting up here as resistance. Definitely going to be a tough push through that level. And it would make sense that we get a little bit of a pullback, probably down to this 91 level, find some support, and then get through there, pushing up to that 93.20, 93.25 zone back at this previous high. That would be interesting and probably makes the most sense in terms of the thesis going forward here. Keep an eye on this one. JNK still looking bullish, but maybe a little extended here in the shorter term. Finishing up with the charts here on the VIX here on the weekly chart, you can see big red week after the doji rejection that we had the week prior. Certainly a zone where we could find some support right here. We've had many wicks in this zone. Certainly possible that we bounce right from here. You can see also some wicks going back all the way to April of 22. Certainly some levels of resistance back in November of 21 as well. But we do have to keep in mind that there is this channel that we've been respecting. We respected the upper resistance once again. Certainly could come back down into this 1660 level on the weekly chart. Momentum ticking back in the bearish direction. Generally, that tends to continue. Similar thesis like we were talking about, coming in here, going flat on momentum, get another tick in the bearish direction. RSI showing bearish. So medium term, probably 1660 is your price target. If you get to that level, then you should certainly expect that we're going to get a bounce to some degree at least. And zooming out here, you can see lots of support in that 16 to 1660 level, basically from April to October of 21. So keep an eye on that level. Looks like we'll probably continue to push down. Maybe we have a little bit of a short-term bounce because of these previous support levels. And then we get the bigger push down to that 1650. That's going to be your ultimate top. And then we start to see the VIX push back up into this 2250 level. That would be interesting. And then we have to watch that second reaction and see if we start to push up into the 30s and see if we start to make some new lows on the overall market. Certainly an interesting thesis, but keep an eye on this here in the short term. Certainly at support, certainly could go lower here on the VIX. Looking at my current positions here, you can see I have one put in the IWM on my IRA. Really, I think we're going to get a bit of a pullback here, and I'm okay getting these shares here on the IWM at 190. I would like to buy some shares here and be able to sell some covered calls against it. That would be interesting. Otherwise, on my individual account, I'm looking to sell some puts. If we do get a little bit of a pullback Monday, that would be great. Otherwise, I'll probably just continue to short-term trade that and see what happens. I do think we're a little bit extended in the short term. Doesn't mean we can't go another point or two or three higher here, but we are going to get a pullback at some point, and I do think it's going to be fairly violent based on the move that we've had to the upside. So still bullish in the short term, looking for that pullback sign, watching the charts closely and being nimble just to try to minimize any losses once we start to get that bigger swing to the downside. And then we'll have to reassess support as it goes. Let me know down in the comments section what you think of the charts or what charts I should be going over. How much further do you think the market is going to rally off this most recent move? Otherwise, definitely like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video, and make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Of course, none of this is financial advice. This is all for entertainment purposes. Good luck in your trading and have a great day.